Happy Thursday morning to you, everyone, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute. I am examining the 23 arguments that Dr. David Hester gave in our formal public debate July 14th and 15th, 2016. He gave 23 rapid-fire, quote, affirmative arguments, unquote, seeking to prove that covenant eschatology is false. And I have to tell you, on his argument number 17, Dr. David Hester really obviously believed that he had Don K. Preston in a death grip. He thought this argument was absolutely devastating. His argument was, well, if the resurrection occurred in AD 70, the resurrection is the time when the last enemy to be destroyed, death, takes place. Now, you have to understand that in 1 Corinthians 15, the last enemy to be destroyed is the Greek word katargeo. All right? And it's, by the way, it's actually in the present passive tense in 1 Corinthians 15, but that's another point to be made. But Dr. David Hester argued like this. If the resurrection occurred in AD 70, then since death is destroyed at the resurrection, then that means that death was destroyed in AD 70. Well, it is either physical death or it is spiritual death, said Dr. David Hester. If it is physical death, there should be no physical death in the world today. Well, just look around yourself. There's physical death everywhere we look. And if it was spiritual death, there should not be any spiritual death today. Therefore, Preston would be forced to make a universalism position. Oh, and then he said, I sure hope Preston won't become a universalist, etc., etc. Well, not much danger of that. But again, Dr. David Hester believed that he had Preston in a death grip from which there is no escape. The problem of it is, as I suggested in the previous couple of videos, Dr. David Hester has simply not done his homework. Now look, David Hester himself agreed that he didn't really understand what he had gotten himself into by agreeing to debate covenant eschatology. Though that's what he said, not me. But it is more than obvious at the shallow, superficial nature of his arguments that Dr. David Hester has never done any in-depth research into this topic of eschatology. And I say that with all due respect to the good doctor. He's a really nice guy, but being a nice guy does not prove that you know much about a subject. 2 Timothy chapter 1. I got up and I responded with what Paul said in 2 Timothy chapter 1 when he spoke about the salvation that Christ has brought that was determined before time began, but has now, that's Paul's now, but has now been revealed by the appearing of our Savior Jesus Christ. Now watch this, who has, now that's an aorist active participle in the Greek. That means it was done. It's also active. I won't go into any of the technicalities, but the point of fact is it is a past tense verb. He has abolished death. The Greek word is, for abolished, is katargeo, the identical word that Paul used in 1 Corinthians 15, the last enemy that is literally, that is being destroyed, present passive indicative, is death. So, let's apply Dr. David Hester's argument. Paul says death had been abolished. That's either physical, but hey, look around. Physical death is still here. Or it's spiritual. Hey, there's still spiritual death. Folks, you got to deal with the fact that Paul said Christ had abolished death. What we have here is an incredibly powerful example of the already but the not yet. Christ had begun the work of resurrection. He had begun the work of salvation. He had begun the work of grace. He had begun the work of redemption. He had begun the work of taking away sin and begun the work of making the atonement. All of that was initiated by the cross, by His passion, by His resurrection from the dead. But it wasn't consummated there. Paul said, I am confident that the one who has begun a good work in you will complete it at the day of the Lord. Philippians 1 verse 6. Very clearly, their salvation was not completed. 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 9, Peter wrote to the 10 tribes of the diaspora and said they were present, active, indicative, receiving the end, the goal of their faith, the salvation of their soul. It was the faith, the salvation foretold by the Old Covenant prophets. But it would be fully revealed at the day of the Lord, which Peter said was very, very near. Failure to honor. Failure to understand the already but the not yet of biblical eschatology. The failure to understand the already of the destruction of death caused Dr. David Hester not to think beyond the end of his nose, with all due respect, and to make an argument that completely and totally falsified his own argument. And I got to tell you, this was a telling moment in the debate. And by the way, for those of you who have asked, yes, the debate is being transcribed. I plan to put it in book form so that you will be able to read it, have your own copy. The DVDs and MP3s are currently being rendered, reduced in size to a smaller number of discs. So you'll be able to get those as well. In the meantime, what you have to see is that Dr. David Hester made a superficial, a shallow, an illogical, and a self-defeating argument when he said, well, if Christ has abolished death, then it's either physical or spiritual, because Paul negated that argument. Paul negated that argument by showing Christ has, past tense, abolished death. Paul negated that argument by affirming the already, but the not yet of that resurrection era, and by showing that the end of the resurrection, the consummation of resurrection life, was to be at the end of the law of Moses, the law that was the strength of sin, as we proved in our last video. Hey, thanks so much for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. Don't forget, if you want to understand the last days and how all of this relates to the destruction of death, get a copy of my book, The Last Days Identified. Go to my website, eschatology.org or bibleprophecy.com or donkpreston.com. Order a copy of the book, mention that you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund your shipping. Hey, I hope you have an absolutely fantastic weekend. Lord willing, we'll see you back here on Monday. You be safe. God bless.